A lot of time and money is spent producing high-quality seedlings and preparing our planting sites. But all our efforts are wasted if the seedlings are not planted on suitable microsites.
A young, vigorous seedling will usually continue to grow well as an older tree. Early success depends a great deal on the quality of the microsite the seedling is growing in. Although a forest site may appear uniform, it's usually a complex of small microsites. These tiny portions of the site may have very different environmental characteristics than the site in general. Depending on the microsite's environment and the ecological characteristics of the tree species to be planted, seedlings may grow well on some microsites and poorly on others. For reforestation to be successful, the ecological characteristics of the seedling to be planted must closely match the microsite environment of the planting spot. Planting spot selection is tied directly to the selection of species, stock type, and site preparation method. Therefore, planting spot selection must be considered in all phases of reforestation decision-making. A plantation's success is dependent upon a series of reforestation decisions and actions. Because of the impact planting spot selection has on other reforestation decisions, the choice of acceptable planting microsites should be decided upon as part of a pre-harvest silviculture prescription. A pre-harvest silviculture prescription, or PHSP, is a prescription for all phases of stand, establishment, and development. As part of the PHSP, a detailed stand and site assessment is necessary to assist in decision-making.
Prescribing appropriate planting spots requires careful consideration of the factors that may be limiting to seedling establishment and performance. Appropriate microsites for my preferred species will vary, depending on the environmental factors that are most limiting. With those factors in mind, I am able to determine which microsites to favor and which to avoid when estimating the plantable spots available.
Some of the more common limiting factors which can affect microsite selection in British Columbia are soil moisture, soil nutrients, soil temperature, frost, non-crop vegetation, and animal damage. Soil moisture can greatly impact planting spot selection. For this reason, the general soil moisture regime must be carefully determined. A newly planted seedling has an extremely confined root system compared to a natural seedling of the same size. On dry sites with coarse, well-drained soils, moist horizons may be very deep during dry summer periods. Summer drought is a common problem for planted seedlings on these sites. Poor water uptake can lead to rapid loss in seedling vigor, a situation that is not easily reversed. On dry sites, avoid microsites with dense cover of grasses or other competing vegetation. Extensive root systems of these species will not allow seedling roots to get established. Raised microsites dry out very quickly. In the winter, mounds may lose their snow cover and expose seedlings to dry air. Acceptable planting spots on dry sites will include depressions free of competing grasses, which will allow seedlings to access moisture in lower soil layers. Exposed microsites in clear-cut systems may encourage moisture losses through increased transpiration. Partial cutting systems may be used to provide overhead shelter for species like Douglas fir. In clear-cut systems, microsites shaded by stumps or slash may be selected. Wet sites with restricted drainage and high water tables can also limit tree survival and growth. Tree roots require oxygen for proper functioning of living tissues. When water occupies soil air spaces, root functioning is impaired. Depressions that collect water are not acceptable microsites. Acceptability should be tested with a shovel. If the hole fills with water, the planting spot is unacceptable. However, seasonal water fluctuations must be considered. If the shovel reveals patchy mottling, the spot should not be accepted for planting since it's subject to periodic flooding. On these wet sites, well-drained raised hummocks should be favored. If naturally raised microsites are unavailable, you may have to consider site preparation to create mounds or a ditching treatment to lower the water table. In summary, seedlings need adequate moisture to survive and grow well. Microsites with too little or too much moisture are not suitable. Although soil temperature is rarely high enough to impair tree performance, cold soil temperatures are a real concern. Very little growth occurs at temperatures below 10 degrees Celsius. Northern and high elevation sites have cold soil temperatures well into the growing season. These cold soils will reduce seedling vigor and growth. In cold subzones, select microsites with large or continuous areas of exposed mineral soil to allow for penetration of heat into the rooting zone. Soil with insulating duff will remain cold well into the growing season. A lot of energy is required to warm water. Consequently, wet sites often have cold soils. Raised microsites will drain and warm quickly to provide good rooting environments. Burnt microsites may improve soil temperatures by reducing the depth of organic matter and blackening the surface, increasing heat absorption into the rooting zone. In summary, seedlings grow best in warm soils. Anything that can be done to warm the soil will benefit the seedling. A seedling requires a supply of nutrients if it's to take advantage of warm soils. Soil and site properties which affect nutrient regime and site productivity must be considered. We plant most seedlings in mineral soil horizons on most sites. However, it's important to consider where most of the available nutrients and appropriate rooting media are found. Many soils in British Columbia have their soil nutrients concentrated in the upper soil horizons. Seedlings able to exploit these horizons perform well. Removal of these nutrient-rich horizons should be avoided during harvesting or site preparation operations. Seedlings should not be planted in lower nutrient-depleted soil horizons. Appropriate rooting mediums and nutrient requirements also vary by species. For example, on the coast, western hemlock is often planted in well-decomposed organic horizons, while Douglas fir should be in mineral soil. Remember, extremes in environmental conditions may force a species to utilize unexpected media. In summary, soil and site properties which affect a seedling's nutrient regime must be taken into careful consideration during planting spot selection. The challenge in reforestation is not finished once the seedling is planted in a moist, warm, nutrient-rich medium. There are a number of above-ground factors to consider. The air temperature surrounding a seedling can be limiting at both extremes. Sites can either be too hot or prone to frost. Heat damage to seedlings is a rare occurrence, confined to a few localized sites in BC. Hot air temperatures have their greatest effect as a result of high evaporative demands, which may result in the seedling experiencing moisture stress. At the other end of the temperature scale, low temperatures frequently cause seedling damage. Both Douglas fir and spruce plantations can be severely affected by summer frosts in the BC interior. Two different types of frost events are responsible for this damage: radiation frost and cold air drainage. It's important to recognize the different conditions that may contribute to each type. On a calm, clear night in a dry climate or at high elevations, air layers may cool very rapidly. A warm soil in an open area will lose stored heat to a cool atmosphere. As heat is lost from the ground, cold air layers develop at the ground's surface, which may lead to radiation frost. Radiation loss can be reduced by planting beside obstacles, such as stumps and logs, or within a nurse crop. These microsites help reduce the exposure of the seedling to the night sky by absorbing and radiating heat back toward the ground surface. Microsites with dense grass cover and other low-growing vegetation should be avoided. A cold air layer will develop within the grass cover. On sites prone to radiation frost, large patches or mounds of exposed mineral soil can be a superior choice. During the day, these sites absorb more heat than adjacent undisturbed microsites. At night, more heat is released for longer periods. Frost can also result from cold air drainage. Cold air drainage can occur when dense cold air layers flow downslope to settle on lower sites. Most susceptible are gentle slopes, the base of steeper slopes, and gullies where cold air can collect. Like water, cold air will continue to move downslope until an obstruction causes it to pool, or it settles in a depression where a frost pocket may form. Cold air drainage should also be considered in block design. Boundaries should be chosen which will not trap cold air in the cut block. In summary, air temperature extremes must be taken into consideration when selecting a planting microsite. You must be able to recognize frost-prone sites and develop strategies to minimize frost damage to seedlings. Where soil microsites are favorable, planting spot selection may be complicated by the presence of non-crop vegetation competing for limited resources, such as light, water, and nutrients. Increasing vegetation cover reduces the light intensity beneath the vegetation. Seedling photosynthesis is significantly reduced by non-crop vegetation cover greater than 50%. Vegetation press may also be a problem. Planting among aggressive non-crop vegetation, such as fireweed, salmonberry, and thimbleberry, should be avoided. Treatments to control these light-competing species should precede any attempt to plant brush-encroached microsites. Seedlings may be planted directly between clumps of slow-growing species like sword fern or rhododendron, but the trees must be planted outside of the drip line of these species. However, you should also consider the beneficial effects that non-crop species may have on seedlings by providing shade and providing soil nutrient status. Even though you might have created what appears to be an ideal soil and air microclimate, consideration of all limiting factors is not yet completed. Animals, domestic and wild, can cause reforestation problems. The trampling of seedlings by cattle has been the topic of much debate. However, it appears that many problems can be avoided if reforestation and cattle grazing activities are carefully planned and coordinated. It's important to realize that cattle typically choose to walk where people would. That is, they choose the easiest route. In a disc-trenched area, they walk down the middle of the trench as if it was a trail. Planting up from the bottom of the trench on the hinge or berm positions should be favored. Planting close to obstacles is recommended since cattle will avoid these spots. Good choices are beside large rocks and pieces of slash, or close to stumps. In summary, most cattle seedling interactions can be avoided by selecting planting spots not heavily used by cattle. Plant the hinge or berm on trenched or plowed sites, or plant close to obstacles. Remember, close communication with ranchers is essential. Wild animal damage to seedlings is mostly inflicted by large ungulates and small mammals. Ungulate damage can be significant, but is heavily dependent on geographic location. Most problems occur near high-use areas, like winter ranges, on small blocks, or near the timber edge of larger blocks. On areas heavily used by ungulates, most plants in both forests and plantations are browsed, including susceptible seedlings. On these sites, you may want to plant a species less susceptible to browsing. Microsites can be selected during planting which obstruct ungulate feeding. Placing seedlings in slash accumulations appear to contribute to increased survival. Also, mechanical barriers or repellents may be used when planting to protect the seedling. Small mammals can be a limiting factor in some localized areas as well. Timing of the planting project can be important, as some species like hares and voles have predictable population cycles. To avoid damage by small mammals, choose microsites with little or no grass. You may consider a treatment to reduce the cover. Reduce post-harvest slash accumulations, which can also be used as cover from predators. Plant less susceptible species in high-risk areas. Retain habitat, which encourage predators. Only after careful consideration of limiting factors can a final species selection and choice of planting microsite be made. Where several very different microsites exist in a stand, the planting of several species may be required. Once the species choice and acceptable microsite have been finalized, the number of plantable spots can be assessed. If plantable spot numbers are expected to be below the target stocking standard, you must ask yourself if site preparation is possible. If no, lower the stocking standards. But remember, you may be able to maintain the target stocking standard by reducing spacing latitudes within reasonable limits. If yes, you must determine the most appropriate site preparation technique. In summary, during a pre-harvest silviculture prescription, consider site and stand characteristics together when developing your reforestation plan. Identify the limiting factors on the site to guide your species choice and planting spot selection. Remember, you should clearly indicate the desired planting spot on the prescription form. Recommendations for planting spot selection at the PHSP stage can only be realized if they're carried through all implementation stages. First, it's important that the harvesting is conducted according to the prescription. To ensure that the prescription is still on track, a post-harvest assessment is necessary.
After harvesting, where no site preparation has been prescribed, I check to ensure that the anticipated number of plantable microsites is still available. Where site preparation has been prescribed, I determine whether prescription refinements are necessary.
Site preparation treatments should be monitored to ensure that the desired planting microsites are properly prepared.
That's her, I think, isn't it?
Before the planting project can begin, planting conditions after site preparation should be assessed. The limiting factors and acceptable microsites identified during the PHSP should be considered again.
At this time, I will consider the recommendations made on the pre-harvest silviculture prescription and the results of my site preparation treatment to make a final planting prescription. This prescription may include refinements to account for circumstances that may not have been apparent at the time the pre-harvest prescription was completed.
After careful prescription development, site preparation treatments, and numerous assessments, it's important that the original objectives for planting spot selection are achieved in the planting project. Good intentions are meaningless if not followed through to the planting project.
In the bottom of the trench.
Communication is the key to success. The contractor must clearly understand what will be expected of his planters.
The road bed and along these main roads.
Also, The intent of the prescription and planting contract must be clearly explained, and the importance of choosing the proper microsite stressed. Since it's the planters who select the planting spots, the objectives and criteria for acceptable planting spot selection must be made clear to them. Close communication with the planting contractor throughout the project will ensure that objectives are not forgotten or overlooked as the project progresses. It's important that the intent of the original prescription is not lost, but carried right down to the planter. Healthy, well-planted trees on acceptable microsites will go a long way toward ensuring a successful plantation.